This is the Neo70 by Qwertykeys. It's an F-rolless TKL design that was derived from the Neo65, which was a board that I reviewed not too long ago. There are a few features that really stand out on this board, which I will highlight throughout this video. And also thanks to the Qwertykeys team for sending me this unit to work on. Now, depending on your configuration and choice of parts, the Neo70 will be priced between $100 to $155 before taxes and shipping, which puts it at a very competitive price point just like the Neo65. So what are your options and what does it come with? Well, you have the Neo70 keyboard base itself, which is made out of aluminum, and it does come in 9 different colors, which include white, retro white, red, pink, lilac, avocado green, navy blue, black, and silver. Then you have the bottom weight piece that comes in 6 different colors, which include white, gold, black, copper, mirror dusk, and mirror chroma. In terms of the weight materials, white, gold, and black will be aluminum, copper is copper, and the mirror finish dusk and chroma will be stainless steel. The badges will be aluminum with PVD coating that includes 3 colors, silver, gold, and black. Plate options include aluminum, FR4, carbon fiber, POM, and PC. In my review unit, I received the FR4 and aluminum plates. PCB options include both hot swap and solder, as well as wired and tri-mode connections. Now you'll notice the PCB is split into 2 pieces, a 60% plus 10%, which adds up to the 70% layout. The tri-mode connectivity option is only supported on the hot swap PCB. For those who haven't seen my review on the Neo65, tri-mode allows you to switch between USB wired connection, Bluetooth, and 2.4G's wireless. If you order the tri-mode PCB, you will also get a USB dongle with it. In terms of polling rates, the wired and 2.4Gs will be 1000 Hz, while the Bluetooth connection gives 125 Hz. Additionally, all the PCBs will support both ANSI and ISO layouts. Additional hardware includes the carry case, rubber feet that comes in 2 colors of white and black, some standoffs and screws, clip-in stabilizers that must be used if you plan on building your keyboard with the O-ring mount. You also get the O-ring itself, of course, some silicone gaskets for the gasket mount, a case foam and the PE foam, which are optional depending on your sound preference, a hex screwdriver, USB-C cable, and a 2-in-1 puller for your keycaps and switches. Just like the Neo65 that came before, you cannot use screw-in stabilizers if you choose to mount your PCB with the O-ring, because there will be a physical interference, in particular with the spacebar stabs. So if you want to use screw-in stabs, they can only be used with the gasket mount system. Implementing the use of magnetic connectors onto a custom keyboard I think is a really neat strategy. The upside of this design is it makes installing and uninstalling very simple. There aren't any JST cables or ribbons to deal with. You just take off the badge on the bottom side of the case and push the alpha PCB out through the cutouts with your fingers. For the nav cluster PCB, you just have to push down on the top and remove the magnetic cover first, then grip and lift it out of the keyboard case like so. The downside is you can't test the PCB by using tweezers, which is a very common protocol prior to keyboard assembly, since the bottom side where all the socket pads are located will now be facing down into the case. The team at Qwertykeys did tell me all the PCBs are pre-tested out of the factory and everything you receive should be functional and you don't have to test it yourself. However, if you did want to test it yourself, then you would have to first install the switches onto the PCB, drop that into the keyboard case, connect your USB-C cable, and test it on VIA by pressing down on each switch. And yes, all the PCBs are QMK based and are compatible with VIA. So let's walk through the entire build process right now from A to Z. QK does have an official build guide for the Neo70, which will be linked below as well. And because there is a build guide, I will breeze over certain parts of the assembly to save time. Installing the 4 rubber feet onto the bottom of the case is always the first step I do for nearly every custom keyboard. Then you want to flip the board over and then peel off the sticker and small piece of protective foam on both the alphas and nav cluster to expose the magnetic connectors. From here, we just move straight into preparing and assembling the PCB with the plate, switches, and foam. Now, the process of prepping the PCB is identical for pretty much every single custom keyboard, especially between the Neo65 and Neo70. So instead of re-recording this whole process, I'm going to replay the PCB prep segment from my Neo65 video right now. The next phase would be building onto your PCB. Like many keyboards out there, plate foams and PE foams are optional, which alters the sound of typing depending on what you like. In my build, I chose only to use the PE foam for the marbly sound. If you want just a slightly more muted and dampened sound, you can use the plate foam, which would stack on top of the PE foam, and or the case foam that would go underneath the PCB. Now with the PE foam, they did instruct to cut out bits of it, particularly where your stabilizers would go. I asked QK why these aren't pre-cut, and the answer is because their PCB supports different layouts and the PE foam needs to be cut differently. For example, if you choose split backspace and split left shift, or ANSI versus ISO. As for the stabilizers, I'm using the clip-in ones that came out of the box. I did loop them myself with 205 grade 0. I am also going to be using QK's Neo white linear switches. They are slightly factory looped and sound pretty decent on hand. They also feel very smooth because of the LY material on the stem. I won't talk too much about the switches because a detailed switch review by itself could literally be a very long standalone video. If you want to learn more about the Neo white switches, I will have a link down below. Here's a note: if you are planning on using the O-ring mount on a hot swap PCB, it is recommended to install the standoffs first to hold your plate and PCB together more securely. The reason being is that the O-ring's tension may push in and widen the gap between the plate and PCB, and there is especially a higher chance of that happening if you're using 3-pin switches via hot swap. The standoffs are not really necessary if you are soldering your switches to the PCB and or using the gasket mount. So installing the O-ring would just mean you have to wrap it around your whole stack between the PCB and the plate. Pretty easy. As for the silicone gasket mount, there are cutouts around the edge of the PCB where you can insert, but when you do, make sure the nipple is facing down. Now all you have to do literally is just drop your assembled PCB sandwich into the keyboard case and it should magnetically click right in. Same thing with the nav cluster. QK does have an official build guide that I'll link below if you want to read every step, which also includes troubleshooting, switching between connectivity on the tri-mode, and LED control shortcuts. Now just to backtrack a little bit, if you're one of those people who bought multiple weights or you just want to access the internals of your Neo70, your bottom weight can be uninstalled by unscrewing a total of 5 screws from the top. When you flip it over, be careful, most especially if you have a tri-mode version, since the battery might just fall out. I don't have a tri-mode version here, so it's just a piece of foam in place of where the battery would be. All the internals look like they are just connected to each other via wires and ribbons, so it's pretty fragile. For the sound test, I will be using the PE foam and the case foam, no plate foam. Plates tested will include aluminum and FR4, and I will be doing both gasket mount and O-ring mount. Here we go. Here are my thoughts on the sound test. I personally could not tell the difference between FR4 and the aluminum plates. However, there was a noticeable difference between the O-ring mount and the gasket mount. O-ring mount sounds heavier and deeper, which I like, but it also sounds like I'm typing and punching through the table. If you turn up the volume on these, you can hear a pounding thud sound on the O-ring test, something that I did not notice or did not hear on the gasket mount. What I think is happening is because the O-ring seals off the whole PCB from allowing any sound to leak out from the side, which means the sound is denser. Gasket mount has a ton of room for sound to leak, so it's going to be lighter and less deep. Something else that I think also contributes to the sound difference is that because the O-ring does provide a more stiffer typing experience, as the PCB is basically sealed around the entire edge. It's as if every stroke of key you hit will result in the entire keyboard hitting or pressing down on the table, as opposed to the gasket mount that basically keeps the PCB afloat inside the case with only 10 small points of contact, which results in a more cushion-like bouncy typing experience. So the Neo70, in my opinion, did improve upon the Neo65 template by incorporating the magnetic connectors, resulting in a very convenient assembly process. The clip-in stabs are also surprisingly great. I did not have to put a lot of effort into modding them at all. It was just 205 lube injections like I would on screw-in stabs. No rattling or ticking, worked out fine. The board does sound great, and I think it does punch above its price and weight. Literally, if you're using the O-ring mount. But of course, take my sound test, like always, with a grain of salt, as you may have your own configurations, your switches, keycaps, desk mats, table, and all that stuff. So the sale goes live tomorrow on Wednesday the 22nd, with an approximate 4-week fulfillment time after purchase. Okay, that's all I have on the Neo70. Let me know what you think about the board. What color would you get? What is your configuration? Down in the comments below. And thank you so much for watching. Like always, I'll catch you next time.